Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit. I am very excited to share this episode with you. It is a very special episode. We're going to be looking at the astrology of 2026. This is the fourth year that at the start of the year, I invite an astrologer to do a deep dive on the astrology of the year with me. And each of them brings a unique view, perspective, and their own unique frequency when it comes to their astrological craft. And I found that having a conversation with another astrologer about what we see as we look at the astrology of the year is so helpful, because there are things that I personally don't always have access to. And these conversations always open me to being excited about the twists and turns and the gifts and challenges that the year might bring. And I hope that you also feel the same as you listen to this conversation. My invitation is for you to not only receive this intellectually, but also feel into what is our conversation bringing up for you. Are there any memories, associations, knowings, imageries, colors, sensations that become available to you as you listen to our conversation? 2026 as a whole is a year that does not hold back. The overall energy, to me, brings a forward movement on an individual and collective level. And so the work that we're sharing here feels more crucial than ever, because this is the year where you're not going to want to miss the details and the nuance, precisely because of the exciting action and the new conversations that the year will bring. I am joined this year by the incredible artist and astrologer, Mara Smith. I love being in conversation with Mara because she brings such grounded presence as well as precision and depth when it comes to looking at astrological patterns and making meanings out of it. Often in conversation with Mara about astrology, I found that I stumble upon new surprising insights and perspectives through which I can contextualize my life. Mara is also a fellow musician, and you can hear this. Mara listens so deeply and has such a natural sense of attunement, both relationally when we're in conversation and also in terms of her personal relationship with astrology and with the planets. In this episode, we've decided to look at the year in 3 segments. So part 1 is the first 4 months from January to April. Part 2 is the second set of 4 months from May to August. And then part 3 is from September onwards. This structure was mostly inspired by Mara's practice, which is deeply informed by the decans, and we talk all about this during the episode. The final thing I will share here is I want to encourage you to continue returning to this periodically, maybe every 3 months or 4 months, and see if your experience of listening to our transmissions deepen. What I've often found is, even though I do this deep study at the start of the year, when I return to it as I gain more experience, as I deepen into embodied observation of what the year is bringing for me, I start to have new insights about the knowing or the patterns that I observed at the start of the year. And my guess is if you do decide to come back to this episode, you will find that your experience becomes richer with each time you listen to our conversation and the things that we are thinking about as we are feeling into the planetary movements throughout the year. All right, here's my conversation with Mara Smith on the astrology of 2026. I hope it serves you, and yeah, I genuinely hope you enjoy listening to us riff about 2026. Welcome, Mara. Here's how I want to introduce you. You are an incredible musician. You're a brilliant astrologer. I think you're one of the rare few people who have taken all my courses. Across the years, I've been doing this work, and I've had the privilege of working with you one on one. And recently, I got a really incredible reading from you that was very grounding for me and eerily accurate. It really helped me kind of contextualize some of the things that I've been moving through. Immediately after that reading, I just thought, I have to have Mara on the podcast. You came to mind as my first choice for doing this 2026 episode with. And I've been doing this yearly astrology kind of overview forecast for 4 years. This is the fourth year I'm doing it. You're my beloved fellow Mercury in Pisces person that I've decided to kind of embark on this overview with. So thank you for being here. Um, yeah, would you introduce yourself for the audience, for people listening briefly? Talk maybe a little bit about who you see yourself to be in this moment, your practice.
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting me on. It is an incredible honor to be in conversation with you about 2026. And let's see, I see myself in this moment to be just somebody who's curious about aliveness. I do see myself as a musician, but also strange to say, even more an astrologer at this point, which is just so
Mhm.
wild. It feels like the ground is shifting beneath me, but very much like reevaluating my whole relationship to music as well in this time. As somebody that is interested in aliveness, the way that I've been really exploring that in the past few years is through the decans and kind of looking into how planets and heavenly bodies are moving through the decans and through the zodiac and finding places of dignity from a decanic perspective
Mm,
rather than through just domicile or exaltation in a sign. So this has been really kind of life changing for me to like zoom in on planets as they're spending time in these very specific areas of the sky where they are bringing some kind of strange strength and unusual abilities to what they bring to each of us.
mm,
And so this has been something that I kind of got into for the purpose of art making as a musician, like bringing a hymn or an ode to the decans through like the planet spending time there in
mm,
these specific windows. But by now, I have kind of I haven't given up on that by any means, but it's just been so interesting to just spend time with the planets in their respective decans and even if it's not in the current time period, like kind of thinking ahead and connecting to times when the planets will be in these places of dignity. So, last thing I'll say is I came to all of this and to astrology in the first place through the tarot. And so I really became familiar with the descending order rulerships of the decans, but have recently moved into also working with the triplicity method of understanding the planets and their relationships to the elements as they're ruling these signs too. And that has like really kind of blown the top off of everything. So yeah, I just find that there's a lot to work with, especially with like the moon constantly moving through the zodiac and being in these very special places of dignity that I'll definitely bring up a few examples later as we get into it.
Yeah. Wow, I'm so excited to hear your perspective on this, and especially looking at the overall 2026 astrological arc through this lens, because I feel like that's kind of like the next layer of astrological exploration that while I understand intellectually, I haven't really fully embodied. Like, I haven't fully explored what it feels like in my body, in my psyche, to look at the planets, look at the signs from this perspective. I feel like this is going to be really valuable to people listening who are also interested in going down that route.
Down the route, down the rabbit hole.
Down the rabbit.
I don't think there's an escape hatch. Like I think once you fall into it, you're like, I live here now. So
Yeah. Great. So I guess our game plan, or what I have in mind, is first maybe we can talk a little bit about any overall thoughts we may have, and then we'll start looking at the year. This is inspired by the decans and how the decans essentially is the division of the 30 degree of the zodiac into three equal pieces of the pie, right? Inspired by that, we decided to look at 4 month stretches, right? Like basically kind of like thirds of the year, January to April, May to August, and then September onwards. And yeah, we're gonna look at that in more detail. But before we go into that, do you have any sort of overarching thoughts, Mara, about the year that you want to share based on doing this research? Just kind of anything that comes to mind that you want to share with folks as we, yeah, warm up into this conversation.
yeah, thank you. I would say overarching thoughts and themes are around the nodal shifts and how significant it feels for the nodes to be moving from Virgo Pisces to Aquarius Leo axis. I think that in combination with Jupiter exiting Cancer and moving into Leo, along with the outer planet shifts permanently back into the signs that they've been in and out of, these feel like the most significant overarching changes or shifts in energy between this year and next year. By the end of next year, we'll be in really, really different territory. Whereas when I think about the end of this year, 2025, compared to the end of 2024, we're definitely in different territory, but there's like some elements that feel like a throwback to the end of 2024. But yeah, so it's just like by the end of 2026, we're somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
And the tools and the allies that we've used all of 2025 have definitely kind of upped their game in a way. And like, um, yeah, it's like changing out kit when you're playing a game. I have sort of like a gamer heavy gamer history. I haven't been so much into gaming as much as I've been into astrology in the past few years, but yeah, I have a lot of gaming things that kind of came into my vocabulary when I was thinking about this year. And this, yeah, by the end of next year, it just feels like, okay, I have a completely new loadout. Like all of my tools and my things I'm carrying in my little bag, I've changed out because I've had to level up. And so my old tools don't really aren't that powerful anymore.
Wow. Bring it on. I love the gaming metaphor. I agree with you. I feel like 2025 and 2026 are kind of like sister years to me. They feel like this transition into a new landscape altogether. And it's interesting because I also work with human design, and there's this whole thing that people in the human design world talk about with regards to 2027 and how that's essentially like this new era. So this is kind of a different conversation altogether, which we're not going to fall into, but I do feel like 2025 and 2026 are preparation year into kind of a completely different landscape. The imagery that comes to my mind is the years prior to this kind of feel like very oceanic, and we're stepping into almost what feels to me like air travel or something like that. That's what's coming to mind, like with all these outer planet changes solidly into air and fire signs. It feels to me like we're doing like air travels. Like we were before in this cruise ship, right? We were all kind of, getting going to a buffet,
Yeah, I was literally gonna say, are we at the buffet?
We're at the buffet, we're going out and looking at this like endless ocean, right? And then now we're kind of in this 2025 is this transition year, and I think we're like going aboard the airplane or something like that. And it's a very different vibe, you know?
Yes.
There's no
It's like
buffet
a,
anymore. We're gonna be
oh
served
no.
our food on a tray.
Oh man. It might be like a little overcooked or dried out. It spent too long on the fire. Yeah. I think the last thing I'll just kind of say as you're talking about this shift with the switch to Leo Aquarius. Actually, let me back up. It feels more like knowing that we're moving with the nodes into the fixed axis here. The sense of like Virgo, Pisces, like tending and like preparing. There's like a lot of like preparation I feel that we've been going through, especially with like the Saturn and Neptune and Pisces. Yeah, there's something about this axis that has felt like getting ready. And then by the
Mhm.
time we move to Leo Aquarius, it's like apply. No more preparation. Like everything that you're going to learn about is through doing it now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A music metaphor I've been using is we're really getting out of the rehearsal spaces. I think in the past few years, it's not like we've been in the practice room. Maybe we all got set back into the practice room around 2020-ish. When I was in conservatory, I had teachers who literally told me I need to stop like playing material in order to like redo my technique. And to
Mhm.
me, 2020 kind of felt like that. But then I think in the past couple of years, we've been rehearsing. We've been doing like dry runs for one another, right? But yeah, I agree with you. I think 2026 is like more go time energy. Yeah. It's like premiere, a public premiere, but there's maybe still some things to work out in terms of the set changes, right? And backstage hiccups and all that. But yeah, we're definitely not away from on stage energy anymore.
Yeah. What you just said reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend and bandmate of several years now. And we had a performance recently, kind of in a different context than normal. And we were laughing about how we didn't really it kind of felt like we didn't practice for the gig in a way. I was like, instead of going into preparation for this, rehearsing things over and over and over again is like kind of like taking notes and scoping things out so that the performance was actually like the rehearsal. It was like, yeah, it's like I didn't really play very much, but I did look at the music a lot. I thought about what I wanted to do and decided to just trust that when I got there, it would like that would be it. Just like
Exactly.
wild. There's
Hmm.
as somebody who's like trained to over prepare. You're like, oh crap, am I really not going to run this?
Can you talk a little bit more, Mara, before we get into the first third? Um, yeah, your thought process, because when I got that reading from you, when I got that consult, you had broken down the year into like three pieces or like three acts, is what I'm thinking about it in my mind, like an opera. And inspired by the decans, I'm curious, I know you've been doing readings, like what have you found about this division of the year into three? Because I think the framework that many of us are used to is maybe thinking about it in terms of quarter, which I think is like kind of a corporate carryover. But what have you found in your experience? I guess I have a couple questions here. One is, what have you found about dividing the year into three? And also, what kind of motivated that? Like when you think about the philosophy behind the decans and the idea or even the energetics behind it, how has that shifted how you look at the Gregorian calendar year?
Oh, thank you for that question. I arrived at this 4-month approach through the annual perfections
Mm,
technique. And not long after discovering that technique, I just found it to be really powerful in terms of kind of mapping out or scoring out just all time, like, but mostly through the perspective of a solar return. I do also still think that there's like a lot of value in looking at things in a quarterly way, but the inspiration came from taking an entire year as a perfected segment of time and then thinking, well, if anybody is going through a given year and looking at the entire 30 degrees of a zodiacal sign, when we're looking at the signs just anytime, we are often considering decans
mm,
and these 10-day windows of time. If we're looking at a season and breaking this season down into the first, second, and third decan, there's something that makes a lot of sense to me in looking at a year and then also breaking it out into these equal segments of thirds. And so that led me to the 4-month window of time.
yeah.
And then as I start playing with that, I mean, I don't think when I started doing that, it was so conscious, just working with my own chart and my own perfection cycles. But as I start talking to other people and looking at the windows when they would start those 4-month windows, these patterns of really significant shifts started kind of emerging. And so sometimes the shifts are really drastic and obvious, like getting in a car accident right on the new window beginning, or getting a new job or losing a job. These are
Mhm.
the sorts of things that people have been telling me about. And so, yeah, I have just taken note and started paying more attention because it seems like for a lot of folks, these 4-month windows are lining up in significant ways. So I just have to give a shout out to my really lovely partner who is a Microsoft Excel genius and helped build a calculator for looking at these windows of time so that it just has become a really easy way to say, oh, yeah, here we are. This
Mhm.
begins here, this ends here. And I never thought that Microsoft Excel would be useful in astrology, but it actually has a lot of features and formulas that have incorporated different aspects of the astrological language. So that's been kind of cool to learn like, oh, corporate life TM has programming for astrology.
It's being composted into its new form.
Love that.
Yeah. I also wanted to bring in something that you had mentioned previously when we met, which was as you divided the year into three parts, you are also kind of placing this awareness of the way we divide the zodiacs into this idea of seasons beginning with a cardinal sign and then fixed and then mutable. So, each of the three part also kind of maybe not forcing it into this structure, but kind of starting to think about it as, start, middle, and end, right? Beginning, middle, and end energy or like arc to it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that kind of language in because I think it's becoming so second nature to me to think about it that way that I didn't even remember to bring in the notion of for any year, that first 4-month period is a cardinal time. The second 4-month period has that sort of fixed quality. And then the last 4 months having that kind of mutable wrapping up quality that feels really important. And that kind of triple aspect and the way that it folds in with the modalities, but also with the elements feels like important to note too, because like as we'll see with 2026, when we're starting each period, we're starting it in an earth sign each time. And it's, if we were dividing into quarters rather than into thirds, we would be looking at not having the same element, but having the same modality instead.
Wow, that's really cool, actually. Just to double click on that, I think what you were really saying is that if we look at the year divided into 4-month periods, then January starts in the middle of Capricorn season, right? Which is a cardinal earth sign. And then May is the beginning portion of Taurus season, which is a fixed earth sign. And then September is mutable earth with Virgo, right?
Yep.
Hmm.
Yep.
That's really cool.
It is. And like, because our Gregorian calendar, I was just going to keep doing its thing. I realized moving forward that, like, oh gosh, the earth element is really always going to be shepherding us into these periods. And that just feels noteworthy that we get to really orient ourselves to the earth element as we are going through these changes and periods.
Thank you. Wow, that's really profound. Shall we start getting into the first third of the year?
Sure.
Okay. So, yeah, is there any transit that kind of feels particularly important during the first third of 2026, that period between January and April, that really kind of stuck out at you?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, yes, the answer is yes. The first thing that really jumps out is the Kazemi town of January
Mm.
and the fact that we have this what feels like really intrepid. This is the word for Venus that came up for me this year is kind of like intrepid. Venus
Mm.
is like out in front, meeting everything, making all of these transits and aspects first, often in like a series of planets that will then come along behind and have the same conversations. There's something about Venus going first, I think that's really lovely and helpful and kind of like laying this groundwork and maybe doing some sweet talking, kind of like trying to get everybody on board for all of these meetings that are going to be taking place. And so, yeah, that I think is the first thing worth mentioning as Venus is going to lead in this Kazemi town in January with the sun and Mars all really, really close together.
Yeah.
And so
In
there's also
Capricorn,
in
opposing Jupiter in Cancer, right?
opposing Jupiter. Yes. So in the second decan of Capricorn, and each of them, yeah, getting to have this conversation with Jupiter. And so what kind of jumped out to me about this first set of transits is the fact that both Venus and Mars have dignity in the second decan of Capricorn. So I guess I'll just introduce the idea right now of with decans and with decanic dignity and looking at their rulers, there's a couple of different systems. one being the one of descending order, and then the other one being the triplicity method. Huge nod to Austin Coppock and 36 Faces. And yeah, I just ate that book up. So it's kind of interesting that in one system of decanic rulership, Mars has that rulership of the second decan of Capricorn, but then in the other system of triplicity, like Venus has it. They are both in this place where they have some special skill, even if it's not like in Venus's case, it's not something that we think about or talk about a whole lot, but I definitely do feel with Venus's connection to the earth element through Taurus that like, yeah, there's a lot to kind of for Venus and Mars to talk about in this conversation with the sun that they're having so closely together. So, and then there's like something about Jupiter being in Cancer and opposite to all of this that made me think about the way in which like water makes earth more malleable. So it's like Jupiter kind of like adding this moisture and helping the conversation through and be more productive just by kind of giving a little bit of moisture in this otherwise like somewhat dry environment. So all of that felt really significant to me. I'm curious to hear if you thought about that transit or like, yeah, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I feel like with that transit, it makes me think about how I conceptualize Kazemi. To me, Kazemi is kind of like that moment when we're on stage and we're watching a play, and then the spotlight goes into like specific characters, right? That to me is kind of like what the Kazemi moment feels like. It's this experience of certain themes kind of being highlighted in a really major way, right? And another imagery that I've heard different astrologers talk about is that Kazimis are moments where planets come to the sun's castle, right? Essentially, the sun is the king that sits on the throne, and then this planet is coming to visit, right? So then it's getting this royal treatment, just being in close proximity with the sun. What I've noticed in my own practice and working with clients is Kazemi moments have this kind of amplifying energy. Like it kind of amplifies the quality that that planet, the non-sun planet, is bringing. For example, if we're talking about Venus, it does bring this, and Venus in Capricorn, bringing this idea of pleasure, beauty, joy, connection, and orientation towards finding endurance in that, right? And I think with the glow of the sun too, it kind of brings in this kind of benediction quality, right? It's kind of like going up to receive the blessing from the sun. And yeah, I think what I'll add here is January is interesting to me because I always look at what the first transit of the year is. I believe in 2025, the first exact transit that we had was that Mars squaring Pluto transit. And this year, the first um, transit we had is the 1st of January. The first thing we have is Sun in Capricorn sextiling North Node in Pisces. We have Mercury in Sag squaring Neptune in Pisces, and then Mercury moves into Capricorn. And so there's something here about the influence of the sun, right? And when we're thinking about like sun aspects, they are clarifying, right? They are kind of they show the true nature of something. Like it's literally like putting things out into the light for the sun to, illuminate over the thing, right? So, yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of think about what you mentioned about Kazemi Town in January and how, like, the role that the sun is playing throughout the year.
Mhm. Yeah. The it's so funny. So I've never seen you wearing glasses before.
Is that
Uh
true?
it really is the first time I've seen you wearing glasses, and it made me think of when you go to, I don't know if you've had this experience when you go get your eyes checked out they put the drops in and they dilate your eyes. And I've had the really unpleasant experience of the eye doctor needing to get a closer look. And so they shine this super bright, like a blind, like a truly blinding light, like right in
Yes.
your eye. And then they're like, look at this one point, which is just painful. But the whole point of this is to really eliminate any problems or
Mm,
bring to the surface anything that needs to be addressed that you just can't see without kind of blinding the person that you're trying to learn about. And so that kind of came to mind too as you were talking about like the spotlight, and then also the way there's something uncomfortable about being like having light just so brightly shining on you sometimes. So it's like there's no escape. And so this is also a part of the Kazemi story for me, is like it's not always super comfortable. And it's also like something being so brightly illuminated that it's hard to see.
mhm. I also want to bring in for the first third of the year, Neptune entering Aries, leaving Pisces for good, and then having that conjunction with Saturn, right? So Neptune entered Aries, Saturn entered Aries, and then they have a conjunction. And I'm tying this to what you were saying about the Kazimis because Aries is the exaltation place of the sun. And I think when we're talking about Aries, there's kind of a, yes, martial quality, but solar quality also kind of coming in. To me, this is really like that Neptune Aries conjunction is like the start of a new cycle. You know, Neptune and Saturn has been kind of dancing around each other throughout 2025, but they haven't created this conjunction until 2026. And yeah, I feel like there's this theme of Saturn and Neptune moving out of the meta land of Pisces into the action land of Aries, right? I want to bring in how Neptune in Pisces is such an interesting. I was actually doing a little bit of research around this. And to me, Neptune in Pisces kind of goes so deep into meta land. It likes to really think about ontology. It likes to think about like where things are coming from, right? Not just the answers or the questions, but what is underneath that. Neptune in Pisces was literally a great example of this is Lana Del Rey, who actually released her first video that went viral in 2011 when Neptune entered Pisces. So if you think about Lana Del Rey and this aesthetics of like glorifying kind of the timeless nostalgia energy. That to me was very Neptune in Pisces. Billie Eilish also feels very Neptune in Pisces. Taylor Swift's new album feels very Neptune in Pisces to me. And then, of course, Neptune in Pisces also brought in this revival of the occult, right? Revival of interest in astrology, for example, that we've been seeing. Prior to Neptune in Pisces, we didn't have like all these astrology apps that we now have, right? There's been a lot of really great sci-fi shows that came out during Neptune in Pisces, Stranger Things. I recently watched this show called Dark Matter, which is about alternate
Oh,
realities.
it's so good.
It's so good, right?
It's so
Dark
good.
Matter is amazing. I think Dark Mirror, which is another kind of dystopian show. Oh, Black
A
Mirror, is
Black
that
Mirror?
Black
Yeah,
Mirror?
Black
Yeah.
Mirror.
It first aired in 2011 as well, when Neptune entered Pisces. So it's really interesting to see like this era maybe kind of wrapping up, and Neptune in Aries is bringing a very different energy. To me, Neptune in Aries is more about like individual dreams feeding into like the collective well, right? That there's less of this analysis of like, what are we all dreaming about, going more into what is your perspective? What is your opinion? What is your genius? And can you really go super far into that and bring something back from your own consciousness, from your own mind, from your own specific preferences, life experiences, trauma in order to bring solutions to like the greater whole. Yeah, What's coming up for you, Mara?
Yeah, a lot came up for me actually. First off, love that somebody else knows about dark matter. That show's incredible.
So
And
good.
I kind of missed it or whatever when it was happening. So, um what you were most recently saying about Neptune and the invitation to attend to the individual dream more so than just the soup of Pisces, along with Saturn too. Saturn in Pisces has made me think a lot about the architecture of a dream. Like,
Mm.
what is the structuring of a dream? And in a way where I haven't been an astrologer for very long, but having this perspective of Neptune and Saturn together in this space, I feel really lucky that these two very different planets I'm getting to experience in the same soup of Pisces and then in Aries, and really like being unafraid to talk about something like the architecture of a dream, which is like maybe very fantastical or almost like silly thing to kind of think about. But there are, I've had the experience of reading about a dream that somebody else journaled about and seeing like even line for line that like I had journaled the very same dream, almost exactly the same. And so with the conjunction between Neptune and Saturn, it's in eclipse season. So like that really I thought was fascinating that, we get the first Aquarius eclipse in February, and then we get this conjunction in the period between eclipses, which is just like, oh my gosh, we really are restructuring and changing direction here. If that conjunction had happened outside of the eclipse window, it would have been really significant anyway. But just having it there to me kind of speaks to what you were saying in terms of the Aquarian connection to each individual's perspective
Mm.
that you can only really get from zooming out enough to notice each individual part being in this tapestry of wholeness. I do feel like the fact that the first eclipse in Aquarius is kind of a part of the story of this conjunction, especially because we have a sextile between Aquarius and Aries. And one of the things that I have really just looking at 2026 kind of deepened my interest in and my ability to pick up on is the power of a sextile. Um,
Mm.
like the sextiles are just literally blowing my mind, like the more I consider them. And I think this is the first place where mentioning that the power of the sextile makes sense when we're considering Saturn, Neptune, and Aries here.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that sextile plays a really big role in the second third. But yeah, just to kind of maybe wrap up your point there before we move on to the second third of the year, I feel like it's really significant. You're right that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happened in the midst of eclipse season when we also have a Mercury retrograde in Pisces, right? So there's something here about the connection between kind of the individual dreams or the individual experience and the collective. There's something here also about this haze of, I wrote this word that came to mind a number of times when I was contemplating this transit actually, which was the haze of action.
Oh my gosh.
And there's something about, if you play like a video game or if you watch action movies, there's always these scenes where there's a lot happening, right? But in the cacophony of what's happening, it's kind of hard to make sense of things while it's happening. It's going to take time later on to maybe revisit that window and to really make sense of it. And I feel like that's kind of the vibe that we are working with in the first third of the year. I do feel like there's something here about really just collecting all the data and doing your best to log them, and then to later in the year maybe come back to it and see what the personal significance of that is. Because I do feel like there's a correlation between how everything is shifting, moving into new territory in the first third of the year. And there's potentially, it's like you can't really see what's happening when you're in the escalator. You're just like going up. And then later you can think about, oh yeah, what was my experience there? What smells can I remember? How is this impacting my personal life? But I think the first third of the year is probably going to bring, yeah, a lot of collective stirrings.
We've
As someone who really likes to try to make sense of situations, I feel like it might be important to remember, especially if you are kind of someone who is contemplative and who likes to ruminate, that like the first third of the year is maybe not really where there's a lot of potency for that.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like the clarity will arrive in moments where you're like, "Oh, I thought I knew it was happening, but boy, like now I know I really had no idea." So, I don't know, at least there's that to look forward to. And like I feel like things are going to clear up.
Hmm.
And there feels like some gratitude for that, even if what we start seeing more clearly doesn't look pleasant or feel pleasant. At least, having the sort of like film dissolve is there's something constructive to come out of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I have been thinking about Saturn and Aries as the anti-hero archetype. What comes to mind is the movie Watchmen. It was based on a graphic novels, and it's basically about these superheroes that are really flawed. People who aren't really altruistic. It's very clear in this movie that they have their weaknesses, their obsessions, their kind of manic quality, and Saturn and Aries kind of has that energy to me. And it's not about like orienting to perfection, but it's about trusting in the momentum of kind of what is propelling us forward. Another phrase that comes to mind is like imperfect actions, right? Like taking imperfect actions, temporary structures, I think are also very much like the vibe for Saturn and Aries. As the old is dissolving and we're moving into the new, we're going to necessarily create structures that aren't going to last. And not worrying too much about whether this is going to endure, and maybe more about does this serve the purpose for now, knowing that it's going to be replaced later on.
Well, yeah, that feels really powerful. I got the image of like a fence, an iron fence or something that is, once we get Saturn and Aries and like the fence is there, it's gonna get really hot. It
Mm,
may even get destroyed, but like it will like serve its purpose for some time,
yeah,
even if it's
yeah, exactly. Is there anything else you want to say about the first third of the year before we move on, Mara, that
uh,
feels important?
let's let's see. There was something about the Saturn Neptune Kazemi. So they're going to have this Kazemi as well and in Aries. So it's like, yeah, we're doing this new thing. You're receiving your assignments like in Aries here.
Yeah.
It's not happening in Pisces where we've been for so long. And this is, let's see, late March. One thing that struck me was that when this Cazimi takes place, Venus will also be in Aries and will actually be in a place of dignity too, like in that third decan of Aries, which I think there's something coming up about how like neither Venus nor Saturn and probably Neptune are super comfortable. Like Aries is not a place where they're stoked or just like super using the tools at their disposal that feel most comfortable.
Totally.
but there's like a way in which Venus is there kind of helping to, I guess, kind of helping accept this new role, like in this place. It makes me think of the tarot card, like the Four of Wands, where Venus is here in Aries, and the name of the card being completion
Mm,
in some systems. And so it's like, yeah, really confirming that, like, yeah, we've kind of closed out this other cycle, and like Venus is here, like, okay, we're on fire, but like we're just gonna keep moving forward.
yeah. The imagery that came to my mind as you were speaking, and I'm looking at the chart here, is dried fruits, actually. Like dried fruits as a metaphor for this specific transit. Because if you look at that lineup, right, the only planet that really is comfortable being in Aries is the sun, right? And it's literally like, if you think about Venus, as being related to like fruits and like goodness, or Neptune as being related to the ocean, it's kind of like you put out all your fruits and your jellyfish, like you take it out of the ocean and you just put it all out to dry, right? There's something about like, yeah, there's something very drying to this transit, I feel like. And it also is worth bringing back your earlier point about how these Saturn-Neptune conjunctions have been happening in Pisces, right, in the previous year, and how in Pisces that conjunction almost feels like moist and it kind of amplifies maybe this dreamscape or like the emotional landscape. And then in Aries, it's like almost the opposite of that, right? There is, I think, a squeezing out of like all this excess water that's been, all this excess liquid that's been in the organism's body. Like the collective mind, the imagination, the structures. It actually also is making me think about like, I know this has a specific connotation for those of us living in the US politically, but it's making me think about the idea of draining the swamp. Like there is kind of a draining of the swamp that, detach from the context in which it's used. If we think about the idea of draining the swamp, it's literally like taking out all the excess that's been festering in it, right?
Mm.
It's like taking out of this, like taking out of these material from the collective ocean and like really seeing if it can survive on land.
Wow. The fruit has been like salted. It's like dry and salty. Like, is it edible? We will find out. I
We
don't know
will
if it's
find
edible
out.
or not. Yeah, I feel like we're gonna find out. Yeah, we will. That clarity, like next year, is
Mhm.
coming. Yeah, lots
Yes.
of clarifying events, especially with like one of the things that happens in this first decan, this first 4-month period is like Uranus moving into Gemini,
Yeah.
which I don't have any great desire to like talk about it with regard to the United States at this point. It's just kind of already out there, but I think that's part of it too. That's a significant thing that we didn't really talk about happening in this first period, but it's huge.
It's huge. And let's talk about it as our entry point into the second decade of the year. Mhm. Because I think that to me the that specific transit, Uranus moving into Gemini, leaving Taurus, is significant, especially, or I think it will be really amplified with the Uranus trine Pluto that's happening in July. Yeah, it's actually really interesting. Like this specific transit is going to happen twice in 2027 and once in 2028, and it's part of a larger cycle that really began with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in 1965, 1966 in Virgo. And I have a few keywords here for Uranus-Pluto coming from this book that I really like, written by Ren Butler, The Archetypal Universe. He framed this in terms of the more kind of positive, like gloriously positive aspect of it, and less conducive aspect or the abysmal manifestation of this. And he wrote on the one end of the spectrum, titanic quest for human freedom and individuation, driving forces of evolution and revolution, sense of participating in an epic death rebirth struggle, erotic emancipation and awakening of natural and Dionysian energies, volcanic ecstasy, and then on the other side, tendency towards driving manic energies, fanatical idealism and obsession with change at any cost, urges for external revolution without adequate processing of one's inner emotional material, and forces of cataclysm and upheaval.
Oof. Yeah. Another word that I think you said you were quoting abysmal. Like, whoa, did that really landed that word?
Yeah.
It's not super chill.
I feel like Uranus in Gemini. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think when we were first moving into it, I was kind of lost for words. Like I didn't really quite understand how to contextualize it. But in this moment, I kind of want to bring in, similar to when we were thinking about Neptune, the contrast between like Uranus and Taurus and Uranus and Gemini. To me, Uranus and Taurus has been a lot about uncovering trauma in the body. Uranus is associated with trauma, right? It's been about reckoning with different ways that we've destroyed the earth. I think this is something that people don't really talk about because we get so fixed on the Saturn piece of it in 2020 with COVID. But it's also important to remember that COVID happened when Uranus was solidly in Taurus. And in fact, an important date was March 1st, 2020, because I think that's where the stay-at-home orders was issued in the United States, in a lot of states. And on that specific day, the South Node in Capricorn was trining Uranus in Taurus.
Wow.
Something that I hear people talking about a lot during COVID is people make connections with others online with similar interests and affinity groups. And then later, when we start to meet in person again, something that people like to say is, "Oh, you have a body, or you have a leg," right?
Yeah.
And that to me is very much like Uranus and Taurus, right? It's this idea of remembering what it means to be back in the body. And then there's also the whole land back movement gaining traction, the reckoning or the realization of what's been done to indigenous communities in this previous era really kind of came into collective consciousness. Like people started talking about ancestral lands, and starting saying the names of the tribes who stewarded the land during Uranus and Taurus. And I think that's really significant. I think Uranus in Gemini is a completely different ballgame. Have been contextualizing this as, we're really entering the era of new ways of learning and thinking that may be unimaginable even a few years back, right? We're all kind of relearning how we think about education. I think there's a complete power moment for traditional education that's coming. We know this with AI, right? Like, and I'm really kind of holding the both and here. I think through new innovations and technology, we're going to remember what it really means to learn in ways that I think traditional education, as you and I know it, Mara, as people who are graduates of this most recent manifestation of traditional education, we've been learning how it strays away from the spirit of learning, right? And I think in some ways, the disruption is going to bring us closer to a sense of what learning actually is. I think we're going to remember actually our analog nature through the new technologies, or at least some people are going to remember the more analog nature of what thinking even means. I think there's also, especially the spiritual communities, get so riled up about AI and the ethics of AI. And I think we've forgotten also things like how AI can help preserve languages, how AI can help us decode lost languages. When I think about Uranus and Gemini, there's this vibe of us relearning what it means to speak languages. Telepathy tapes also became a cultural phenomenon as we're kind of shifting from Uranus and Taurus into Uranus and Gemini this past year. And I think this whole idea of what it means to learn is a big story as Uranus is moving into Gemini. And I think people are also going to be pursuing new interests that may have seemed completely unrelated in the past few years, in the context of the past few years. What are you thinking about with regards to Uranus in Gemini and Pluto in Aquarius?
Something that I remembered as you were talking about Uranus floating back and forth between these two signs is that there is a conjunction that Venus is going to make to Uranus in the very
Mm,
last degree of Taurus before they both ingress into Gemini, which just feels like, whoa, so huge that we get to have one more really grounding and grounded conversation with Uranus before it just takes off into this new territory. And we get to have that conversation with Venus, like its ruler present there. And this kind of unexpectedly for me does bring in what you're talking about with education changing as we know it and the idea of speaking and learning, speaking like Taurus and the throat connection there. In some ways, like AI frees up space for us to learn about things in a way that we've been so distracted that we can't, really focus in on learning about the body through Taurus. Like once Uranus moves into Gemini, we can get back to focusing on body awareness without this very disruptive, if not disruptive, distracting and huge presence in this earth sign. So, yeah, there's something to like just bringing Venus into the conversation here right after this conjunction in Taurus. Venus and Uranus are going to be getting into this sextile territory. So, coming back
mm,
to like the sextile and then like also the trine, I've kind of sunk into this awareness of sextiles as this like scaffolding around the zodiac so that all of the quote unquote masculine signs being sextile to each other and all of the feminine signs being sextile to each other and the sense of them just forming this kind of like web that is supportive if subtle around the zodiac. And so Venus and Uranus will be moving into this position where they're part of the scaffold then with Pluto and Aquarius and then Neptune and Saturn in Aries.
yeah.
And so they come in and like fill in this next piece of it. And my sense of these textiles is actually like musical. I can't help but think of like whole tone scale in music where you're like playing every other note and it kind of always gets you back onto this same grid of being plugged into this particular scaffold. And then, you can switch to the other grid and be on the other side. I feel like the ingress into Gemini is really starting to make this like scaffolding come online in a whole new way. Like we've had a little taste of it with Aquarius and Aries, as we've talked about, but now Gemini gets to be a part of the conversation too.
Mm,
And this is all right near the end of the first period / the top of the second period too. So it's really like kicking things up and kicking things off in a way.
yeah. There's that week, as you were speaking, that I'm reminded of, Mara, which is, let me look up the date here. I believe the week of July 15-ish, like from July 15th to about July 24th, where that seems really significant for me because July 15th is when we have the Neptune sextiling Uranus and Pluto, or
Yeah.
sextiling Uranus, right? And then July 17th is where we have Uranus and Pluto trine, and then July 24th, Neptune sextiles Pluto, Aries and Aquarius. And yeah, I think this is big. And obviously, because these are outer planets, I think the effects of them go way beyond just like the exact transit, right? Like I think it's kind of this like I'm seeing a pillow in my mind's eye. Like it's kind of like this giant pillow, right? It's kind of like this cloud of this is kind of a violent image, but it's making me think about nuclears and how it emanates this pillow of clouds on top of it, right?
Mm.
It's kind of that energy, and I think it's going to last for a while. But I think this is really this week is significant because it's as if we've been introduced to these planetary influences in these new signs for a while, but we're finally going to see what happens when they get together.
Mm.
Like when they're actually like these are not just the moments where they've been like dancing around each other or kind of flirting with one another, but they're actually making contact, right? And yeah, I think it's going to give us a flavor of what's to come with this new kind of background frequency.
Yeah. By the time we get there in July, Jupiter will have left Cancer. And so
Yep.
the like balm that we've kind of had, like Jupiter's been doing so much work holding a lot of things together through the water element. I feel like that image is really apt consider of the nuclear bomb and just like the dryness and the heat of it and the fire of it. Because yeah, Jupiter was really keeping things keeping things from getting too hot. And it's like Jupiter's out. Like Jupiter's gone to do fiery things.
Yes.
Um, it's gonna get hot.
Yep. Jupiter is also nighttime triplicity ruler of Leo, though, right? So I think there's kind of a quality of Jupiter in Leo that feels it's not as powerful maybe as Jupiter in Cancer, being exalted by sign, but I do think there's still relative energy and power and movement, maybe even momentum with Jupiter in Leo. Jupiter in Leo feels very supportive to me. I'm thinking about how in late August we have Jupiter trining Saturn. This current Jupiter trine Saturn that we're going to have at the end of August is actually part of the cycle that began in 2020. So Saturn and Jupiter, right, had a conjunction in 2020 in Aquarius, and this Jupiter,
Was that
um,
the one that was at like 1 degree of Aquarius?
it was 0 degree Aquarius. Yeah,
Yeah.
0 degree
Sorry.
Aquarius. Yeah, at that time, right? Like if you think about just the by sign dignity, Saturn was the stronger one. And I think we've been building something from that conjunction that will start to yield its fruit in August, late August, with the Saturn trining Jupiter. And, with Jupiter being in Leo, Saturn being in Aries, Jupiter has like relative power compared to Saturn. And I think this is really positive. And, to kind of go back to Ren Butler and some of his language here, I want to bring it in because I think it's really helpful to think about, specifically because I think this is not the energy that's like trending with the rest of the astrology, right? Like, I think the
Mhm.
energy that's trending with a lot of the astrology feels very much like, excuse my French, but it's like tits to the wind, right? Like balls to the wall kind of energy. Just do it, But I think this Jupiter trine Saturn is a different energy. Ren Butler said, virtues of maturity and balance, integrity and perspective, a regard for quality over quantity in life. And then on the other side of it, there's feelings of constriction and missed opportunities, tendency for pessimism to outweigh optimism, the kind of gilded cage energy. And this Jupiter trine Saturn also has Mars involved with it. Mars is squaring Saturn, and I think there can be like a feeling of frustration around this otherwise positive experience that Mars is kind of bringing in. There can be a sense of defeat, or like what's the point anymore? Like there's kind of nihilism. I think that can come in with that square to Mars. But overall, I do think that Jupiter trining Saturn is a really helpful influence with all the outer planets moving. There's a quality of like, what's even the point of the things that I've been working towards?
Mm.
There can be this sense of like, what, let's just throw it all. And I think Jupiter trining Saturn is a reminder to not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
As you're speaking to, what kind of came online for me was the idea that Jupiter then joins this sextile. It's
Yeah.
just like, and now I'm sliding in. So,
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, now Jupiter's in is this pulling that last little. It's like putting that last little screw into this structure. We still have one sign that's not really going to be involved, but yeah, and I actually really love that you brought in Mars too, because when Jupiter does this ingress into Leo, it's going to sextile Mars and Uranus in this scaffolding too. So, like, Mars is definitely playing its part with like its rulership of Neptune and Saturn there too. And there is a potential, I guess, when I think of Mars and Gemini, for like the mind to just get really stabby and get really worked up with like a sort of frenetic energy. But then, of course, there's this presence of Uranus there too. So there's something about, even though Jupiter has changed signs and it's no longer in its exaltation, like you said, it's still really holding the space and sort of stabilizing things through this trine with Saturn, and also just this being a part of this sextile structure.
Yeah. How do you see the energy of Jupiter in Leo being different than Jupiter in Cancer?
I more feel it. I mean, it's hard to put words to in this moment, but it does feel like part of this like drying out process. Like Jupiter has been the ruler of Saturn and Neptune for so long while they were in Pisces. And
Right.
so it's like, even after all this, like Jupiter was still having something to say about Pisces, but now like Jupiter's not really talking about Pisces anymore. It's like, if we're going to talk anything, we're going to talk Sag, you know,
Yeah.
which, yeah, would be part of that scaffold in terms of, yeah, like just where the conversation is being directed. And this to me kind of harkens back to what we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation here, which is just like, we're going to land in a really different place by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so I think Jupiter's role has a lot to do with that, even though, by the end of the year, it's still having a lot to kind of manage, or with the Aries, Saturn, and Neptune, it's not directly control in charge of those two planets.
Yeah.
It's like kind of still being the intermediary somehow.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share, Mara, about the second third of the year?
Yeah, this is also the period of time when the nodes do switch from Virgo Pisces to Aquarius Leo. So that's also a huge part of the story, that with the ingress of the South Node into Leo and Jupiter on the other side, it's like, okay, we're really doing Leo Aquarius now.
Yes.
So yeah, with the change of the nodes, I mean, there's just so much that we could talk about. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the switch. I want to know what you have to say about that.
The Virgo Pisces axis to me, I agree with you. There's a lot of kind of prep energy to it. It's about listening to spirit, listening to greater intelligence, and balancing that with taking action, right? Like doing the work that's necessary in response to what you're hearing. Aquarius Leo is very different, right? Like Aquarius Leo to me is this energy of playing a concerto in front of an orchestra or like with an orchestra. It's like this idea that like, yes, each of us maybe have something really unique that we're bringing in, but we also don't do this alone. And there is also, because of its rulership, like being ruled by the sun and being ruled by Saturn, it also has to do with letting yourself really be seen in your authentic energy and how that impacts the greater structure, right? And I think the focus, even just thinking about it energetically, Virgo Pisces can have this energy of kind of working in the background a little bit more than Aquarius and Leo. And Aquarius and Leo also being fixed signs, fixed signs are not here to be shy, right? Like fixed signs are not here to be modest. Fixed signs are here to bring it, and so there is, I think, going to be more of that invitation, especially for people who have maybe been hiding a little bit, people who have been, kind of just slowly chugging away at their craft or honing their gifts to really just be like unapologetic. Yes. Hello, exactly. Like really be unapologetic, like claim yourself. And I think along with that, there's going to be some growing pains as well, right? Because in the process of letting ourselves be seen, especially thinking about the North Node in Aquarius, being seen in front of the community, being seen for the gifts that you want to share with others, I think we're going to do it imperfectly. I keep thinking about, I actually have this placement natally. I have the North Node in Aquarius and South Node in Leo when I was born. And I've noticed this pattern, Mara, throughout my creative journey. Whenever I start to take my craft seriously and take my interest in my passion seriously, I always go through periods of being really weird about it. Like forcing myself to go out there and speaking about it. And sometimes there is the feeling of like, am I inflating my ego too much? Or am I focusing too much on how this is gonna come across to other people and not really being mindful of my own need for validation, right? And I'm really talking here more on a very internal level, but I think we're also going to see repercussions of that happening in the collective too. To kind of make more kind of mundane predictions around this, I think we're going to have, what we saw with Katy Perry and Justin Trudeau happening a lot. Like we're going to see people who have been holding this kind of, oh, like I'm this respectable public figure suddenly showing up in a way that's very human. And we're going to be surprised. We're going to be like, wait, what?
Yes. Oh
Like
my gosh.
you have a love life too? Wow. I'm like, my mind is blown?
Oh my gosh. What a great example. That's a spicy one. Yeah. Wow. You know, as you were really beautifully riffing on that, and I don't think I realized that you had Leo Aquarius nodal plate. Like this is your nodal return, which is pretty huge. This just brings me back to maybe when I first started learning from you and learning through the season of Virgo one year and starting to have a new connection to Virgo as this, it was just such a nebulous, like a place I kind of ignored in my chart. Like I don't have any planets there, but I've been thinking about Virgo a lot since the South Node has moved through there. And I kind of like have been more connecting to South Node rather than North Node. North Node and Pisces, I still don't really know what the F is happening there. Like, what is this,
I
right?
agree. Yes.
And I feel like I suspect that once the North Node gets to Aquarius, there might be a little bit more clarity in just what the agenda is there. But thinking about the South Node in Virgo, and one of the key words of Virgo that has arisen in my understanding the past couple years is like the energy of darting and pivoting and darting and pivoting over and over. So it's like Virgo may not necessarily be super concerned with the final destination or with this confusion of this Pisces Virgo axis and the nodes. Like we don't know exactly where it is that we're supposed to go, But Virgo is like handing these little tools over and over again of like, okay, well, it's not exactly this way, but maybe if we turn a little bit and move a little in this direction, we'll get more sense of the terrain and where things are ultimately where we need to be heading. And
Yeah.
so like my sense of this nodal shift really kind of gives me this idea of like, well, once the South Node moves into Leo, it's like we have a degree of pivoting that we're not going to do anymore. It's
Mm.
almost like
Yeah.
discovering through the pivots that there's like a some sort of something in the landscape that we can like see and orient to, so that even if we do make adjustments moving forward, we know we're not going that way because like that mountain is over there or that like creek is over there. So we don't have to like really worry about accidentally going in that direction. It's like, okay, with this like Leo, Aquarius fixedness, we can kind of just be like moving in this new direction without having to adjust quite as much.
I love that so much. I think it's so true because it's not that fixed signs don't require recalibration, but I think there is a quality when we're in fixed signs where recalibrations happen from the orientation of knowing and understanding and being solidly grounded in like what the through line is. You know, it's almost like I think with the South Node being in Virgo, it's more like kind of the scoping out energy, right? Of like trying to figure out, like, okay, what is the pattern? But by the time the South Node moves into Leo, we're already clear about what is at the core of that pattern. And so any adjustments made is in service to kind of returning to that pattern, right? And when we're thinking too about shifting the South Node shifting from like Earth sign into fire sign, I think there is a sense how I'm contextualizing this is there's more of that like spiritual hearth, that like spiritual bonfire that we have like a connection to, you know, and we know like what we're working towards, we know like what really matters to us, and it's becoming more about continuing to reestablish that connection, right? And noticing moments where we forget or stray away from our connection to spirit or to life or to like that greater power, and remembering that, you know, remembering our sovereignty when we are connected to this higher field.
Oh my gosh. That that warmed me. I don't know if it was like you talking
Mm,
about the fire or the fire of Leo or the hearth, but I also got like an image of
mm,
the hermit card, like taking this torch, taking this light, and like at least using that light, that lantern to like orient and like having that be the way shower,
mhm.
the fire element as what we're following now.
Yes,
Mm.
beautiful.
Wow.
Shall we talk about the third decan of the year?
Let's.
What's the vibe that you're feeling for September to December, Mara?
Oh my God. Well, I think a lot of it we've actually just covered with this shift, largely of Jupiter and the
Mm,
node. There's that Saturn Mars square that you mentioned that kind of like kicks off this last period here, which is quite intense. I mean, there's no way that Saturn Mars is not going to be an intense entity to be talking about. And then, of course, we're dealing with like the square. But I do feel a little bit of balm in the fact that like Mars at this point will be in Cancer.
mm,
So it's not the Mars with like the sharpest fangs, that it could have.
totally.
So that's kind of nice. And it makes me feel too like, well, whatever this Saturn Mars square is bringing us to focus on
Mm,
is really, in the end, here to nourish us. There's also like this, I think at the time of this square, Mars is going to be sextiling Mercury
yeah.
in domicile in
Mhm.
Virgo. And so there's this ability to feel all of the intense emotions of the square, but then actually have a way to articulate it, a way to be able to think and talk about it and process it. So it kind of is like, at least if the nodes have switched, Mercury's in Virgo, still helping, like feeding us this line of information about like the changes that we can make or the adjustments that we can make in order to like help us move through this kind of like tense aspect. I don't know. What do you think
Yes.
about that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you're bringing our attention here because my sense of the last third of the year in general is that, okay, now the rhythm section is set, right? Like we're solidly in a landscape where all the outer planets are playing the tune that we're going to be playing for a while. And then I think what I see happening in the last third of the year is there's kind of a narrowing of the focus, less of a focus into kind of this manic collective change that's been happening, more into the more personal experience, right? I think the first third of the year for me was very much about this kind of Neptunian haze that we're in, plus like the sun, right? Like really looking at the Neptunian haze. The second to me was very much about like the kind of intensification or the big bang of like here are the new outer planets. They're like making contact with each other. This is the new key that you're going to be playing in, right? This is the new rhythm that we are like, we're not in the same time signature anymore. That's like, let's move, right? We've been going like, to the music nerds out there, we've been going like andante largo. We're moving into like allegro allegretto, right?
Vivace?
Yeah, vivace. Yes, exactly.
Oh man.
Like it's go time, right? And then I think the last third of the year, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for really looking at what was the emotional and structural impact of that. Like, how do we feel about that? Right? Like, with this Mars and Cancer specifically, I think Mars and Cancer is super sensitive and emotions are definitely going to come up. This transit feels frustrating to me because here are the malefics. The malefics like to take action. The malefics like to stop things from happening, right? But they're both in signs that they're not well resourced in. And so there's kind of this quality of like the structure's no longer working for us, or we're kind of feeling unheld by the structures, and there are big emotions that come up from that. But as I'm looking at the chart here of that square, the Mars in Cancer is ruled by Moon in Taurus, which is exalted, right?
Mhm.
Every single individual I know who has Moon in Taurus are such like caring human beings. Like they really know that like the body is fragile, the body has limits, right? And like how can we really nourish the body? And how can we have this secure, grounded attachment to the body, right? And then that Saturn in Aries, is ruled by Mars in Cancer, which is not that great, but I think it's maybe getting some help from that Jupiter in Leo, right? Like there is the trine to that Jupiter in Leo, which is pretty exact. So as you mentioned, to kind of bring in what you just said here, Mars has a sextile to Mercury, and then Saturn receives a trine from Jupiter. So I think there's a lot of, if we want to kind of zoom in and look at our own stuff here, I think there's a lot to be gleaned from really looking at any like pain or disappointment or fear that can come up during this time. And yeah, it's a very fertile ground for, I think, kind of personal development, but maybe in a slightly different way than what we've been focusing on the past few years. Like the past few years was all the focus on water and earth sign, I think has felt very much like, okay, sit down, meditate, meditate again, meditate again. But I think here there's more of this, it's more conversational to me. It feels more about like giving yourself permission to be compassionate with like places where you failed, maybe,
Mm.
or where things haven't really worked out to your expectation or your favor.
Wow. Oh my gosh. As you were as you were speaking on that, I kind of got this image too of like Mars and Saturn in their respective signs, Cancer and Aries, and like to be able to kind of take stock of things not having gone perfectly, and with Mercury helping us like be able to kind of think about, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. I also got this image of like the spa being in like a hot spring, like especially with this moon, in Taurus, that knows how to like luxuriate and take time. I just had this thought of like, well, wouldn't it be nice to sort of heal through a boil, like not maybe like scalding hot water, but being in a warm bath, or like having something about steam
Yeah.
like rejuvenating you. Now that we don't have, Jupiter helping us out with water, at least we have Mars.
Yes.
Sort of like helping us with this emotional content, which is something that Mars and Cancer can do, like, and
Hmm.
do really.
Yeah.
And so that feels really sweet. I don't know. Maybe I just really want to go to a spa.
Same. I'm just thinking about like great hot spring experiences. And yeah, I feel like hot springs are also very like Cancer Aries, right? Like there's kind of, yeah, hot springs feel very Cancer Aries. And then also bringing in that Taurus, Leo, Virgo energy there. Yeah, that's actually a really good practical advice, Mara. Everybody go to a sauna or
Yeah, let's go.
hot
It's
spring,
a
November 1st,
appointment now.
that Labor Day weekend if you live in the US.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah, that's a
right?
good idea.
Yep, yep. I'm also looking at the Venus retrograde that's happening in October. I feel like that stretch of time between October and then November is a very it's internal to me. It does feel internal. That Venus retrograde going from Scorpio back into Libra and then immediately followed by Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is providing a lot of opportunities for really thinking about what matters to us, right? And how do we want to bring our attention to what matters to us? I immediately thought about the Marianne Williamson book, A Return to Love, which is, her spin, her take, her interpretation on A Course in Miracles. And there were a few, some of the most widely quoted passages from that book in terms of thinking about this Venus retrograde, right? She wrote, our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And then in another part of the book, she also wrote, it takes courage to endure the sharp pains of self discovery rather than choose to take the dull pain of unconsciousness that would last the rest of our lives. And then another one, available people are the ones who are dangerous because they confront us with the possibility of real intimacy.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Aren't those
I
just
I
like the
really
greatest
I
quotes?
really need to read this book. I really do. Oh my
It's
gosh.
really good.
It's really good, especially, the first part of what you were quoting there made me think about the Venus retrograde and the way Venus retrograde is going to square Pluto when she's discussing our fear of how powerful we actually are. This feels really relevant. as the theme for Venus retrograde, I think, as it contains that square to Pluto and the nodes too, also being in Aquarius Leo too. And that also just feels really related there. You have this Mercury retrograde and then Venus, yeah, they're going to be like T squared to like the nodes. Mars will be in Leo, I think, for that Mercury retrograde. So, gosh, what a absolutely perfect, lyrical, and beautiful way of expressing fear of power and self-empowerment through the slowing down that Venus is going to do.
Yes, exactly. What comes to my mind right now is I've been studying what the 2027 shift that human design is talking about is actually really all about. When you look at some of the keys that are shifting from the old era to the new era, it has to do with the dissolution of tribal mentality about holding on to connections at all costs into empowering ourselves to exercise our agency and following resonance so that we can actually have relationships that have the kind of depth and intimacy that we're really looking for, right? And I
Mm.
think we're already seeing this happening progressively for a while. Even the idea of people choosing not to be in contact with harmful family dynamics. I think this idea of estrangement has started to really come into the mainstream in ways that I think is unheard of, maybe even in the past 6 years. There was a time where the idea of being estranged from your family is like a taboo. People don't talk about it, or people immediately consider that as a bad thing. Like, why would you want to do that? Like, you have to repair this familial bond. But I think we're moving into an era where um, connection and collective power is defined differently. We used to define collective power and connection through sticking with like blood family no matter what, right? We used to define it as like nationalism, really sticking to nations and like borders, governments, no matter what. And I think we're heading into a new era where we're probably going to see a lot of that being shaken up
Mm.
and normalizing that, right? And really accepting that, thinking also about like how, in that Pluto Uranus trine, right, between Gemini and Aquarius, the kind of missing piece is the Libra, right? hmm That I think we're going to see shifts in how we relate to one another in a really major way.
Wow, that made me think of there's a grand trine somewhere floating around in there with the sun in Libra. Yeah, when it is going to actually help kind of bridge that, fill in that empty space. It feels like it's been missing. Like Venus will have been spending some time in Libra, yes, but like the sun making that grand trine with Uranus and Pluto, I think is really this is what I'm just thinking of as you speak there. But also what you were saying put me in mind of, okay, like maybe we are gonna figure out what the North Node is trying to do with this reorientation past tribe and more like this universal humanitarian perspective that we get through Aquarius is where, the node is taking us.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Anything else you want to add about the last third of the year, Mara?
Briefly, and this may harken back to something that I was kind of talking about. The last 4-month period, this last decanic period, with the nodes having switched into Leo Aquarius, kind of made me start paying attention to a place of the moon's dignity in the triplicity system. So the moon having dignity in the third decan of Scorpio,
Mm,
and the way that, like, with the moon moving through its places of all the places, whether dignified or not, it's just constantly moving through, and it has this kind of thrum to it.
mm,
And by this last period, that thrum, when it reaches the third decan of Scorpio, is going to be constantly activating the nodes in the
mm.
third decan of Leo and Aquarius.
Right.
And so we're going to be constantly like getting the moon squaring those places in a way that feels really significant to me, like just considering the perspective of Scorpio and the willingness to really just kind of go there and go deep and go direct. So by the time the nodes do that switch, like we're gonna just have that activation from Scorpio 3 moon, like until the end of the year. And it's just like, this is here now.
Mm,
And there's times where that activation is, yeah, just kind of depending on what else is happening in the astro weather, they feel really, really poignant. So I guess I'll just mention that. I don't necessarily want to take the time to go into those aspects now, but I think it's worth mentioning just to
yeah.
kind of paying attention to the moon.
Yeah. Can you maybe enlighten us a little bit about how you see the moon in the third decan of Scorpio?
Yeah. You know, a lot of this kind of to contextualize why I feel like it's significant with the moving around the zodiac. One of the places in which my attention was really drawn a lot was to the moon in the first decan of Libra, because of, through the first half of the year, the moon just constantly being activated by Pluto in Aquarius,
Mm,
making the opposition to Neptune and Saturn and Aries, and then also making the trine to Uranus in Gemini. It's like the moon has been really, really telling the story of this one kind of sextile pattern and like around the chart. Like it just, and so with this kind of like shift into the fixed axis, the orientation of the moon for me is much more it just feels much more focused. Like we're less scattered about the entire sextile of the zodiac over where we've been talking about Aquarius, Gemini, Aries. And now we're really allowing the moon in this watery place and in this thick kind of swampy place to almost like condense or solidify or focus on what's happening in the Leo Aquarius axis.
right.
So it just feels like it feels like the direction that our focus is moving in or is flowing in is much more fixed. And it's always interesting to think about, for me, the moon in a fixed sign because of the way that it's so changeable and mutable all the time. But even through just the rhythm of moving through the zodiac, we also get the fixedness of this change, and we can expect many things about how we can sort of predict a lot of the ways in which the changes are going to come, even though we know that they're coming.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess there's that question of I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I know where to look, which is kind of one of the things about astrology in general is like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I have instincts about where and when to look at things. And I feel like the moon in Scorpio 3 is kind of speaking to that instinct that's so powerful, like coming from the fixed axes, or it's just kind of like there. You don't have to like think about it. It's just like body knowing. It's just like present immediately. And so,
Yes.
yeah, kind of what that area of the chart is telling me.
I love that. Yeah. I also think about how Moon in Scorpio is really expert at detecting bullshit.
Oh yeah.
I've seen, people with Moon in Scorpio who are very much like, I feel like Moon in Scorpio is really conducive to recognizing when there's a discrepancy between what we say we want versus what the subconscious or the unconscious is wanting. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there for, especially thinking about it in the context of that square, right, to the nodes. I think there's opportunities for like looking at places where we say we want to shine, we say we want to be connected, we say we want to contribute, right, to like the future that we want to see, but maybe where we're still being held back a little bit, or maybe where we're still, yeah, hanging on to past stories that then create kind of like a habitual response.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Oof. The rewiring of habitual responses. Yeah. Like, and through the fixed signs of all places.
Yeah.
What a blast. This feels
Exactly.
like the mushroom clouds. Yeah. And just trying to make sense of what the landscape's going to look like when the dust settles.
Yeah. 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 Well, does that feel like a wrap, Mara? What do you think?
I think we're pretty close here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts that you want to share? Maybe advice, curiosities? I kind of want to bring in here that, the longer I've been doing this, the more I see that often the value of looking at a future swath of time is really about creating space for us to even consider. It's not so much the insights. I mean, the insights can be really powerful and helpful too, but I think it's more about the act of like looking, right? And giving ourselves permission to look. But yeah, I guess I'm curious if there's any advice you have for people, anything you're still curious about, or like things that you're still wondering about from this vantage point of looking at the year from we're recording this on December 26th. So, before the year even began, right? Technically.
Um, well, the one kind of curiosity that I will mention that we haven't talked about is related to this last period with the Mercury retrograde and the
Mm,
Venus retrograde. So, one of the things I noticed from the outset was looking at all the Mercury retrogrades. It's like, okay, we're doing water signs this year for Mercury retrogrades. Yeah.
yes.
And so that in itself is like maybe its own topic to like, okay, what we're really, especially, oh, we're going to have Mercury retrograde in Pisces. So for any Mercury and Pisces folks like ourselves, this is like, okay. But I noticed that so like Mercury going into its shadow period in, I think, February, it's going to go into the shadow period at 8 degrees and 29 minutes of Pisces. And then when I like was looking at the Venus retrograde, I noticed that Venus starts the retrograde at 8 degrees and 29 minutes of Scorpio. And so I'm like, wait, what is this? Like, what is it about this area of water signs, like these degrees of water signs that Mercury and Venus are both trying to give us some information about?
Mhm.
And so that's kind of just like one thing that I'm going to put a pin in and maybe like reinvestigate, or not even reinvestigate. I think with the fact that this is happening in like water, it is more about like sensing into and feeling into and trusting like whatever emotional content comes up from thinking about or from working with these two planets like in these watery signs and their
Mhm.
retrograde. So,
Yeah.
like, reevaluating emotional stuff that they're going to show throughout the course of the year, that I think was kind of like a parenthetical thing that I didn't really pick up on until quite late in this. And I'm like, that feels like kind of fucking huge. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Um, just
Yeah.
noticing that.
I love that. Yeah. I think that's really insightful. For me, what I'm really looking at, we don't often talk about this when we're looking at the whole year because these are not super rare transits, but I am really looking to a couple very beautiful Jupiter Venus transits. One is right in the middle of all that Neptune Saturn conjunction, the eclipses happening, the Mercury retrograde. We have Jupiter trining Venus on February 22nd, and Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. Venus is exalted in Pisces. Like, wow. That is like if it weren't happening, around all of this shenanigan, I think this would be an extremely amazing transit for doing anything, like it's like such a classically like good luck transit. And then I'm also thinking about how there is another one, which is the Jupiter conjunct Venus happening on June 9th. I believe Jupiter will still be in Cancer. So Jupiter and Venus are both in Cancer. Yeah, those two transits, I'm really like, yeah, like be on the lookout, really like, ride the waves of like the goodness that is coming our way because I think especially thinking about how they're happening in the first and the second third of the year. These are like windows of time where it will be really easy to get so lost in all of the nuclear cloud, right? That, all of the outer planets are creating with this new vibe. And I think it's so easy to forget how powerful some of the personal planets are making really powerful transits as well, which then kind of brings me to maybe the last point I want to make here, which is that when we're looking at larger swath of time, as Mara and I have been looking, we're kind of not always focusing on the smaller thing, right? Which is why I love that you're bringing in the moon there, Mara, because I think that that's so often like overlooked when we're looking at these larger cuts of time, right? And I think there's still so much, yeah, like there's some really exciting like personal planets. Like we didn't even get into all the Cassimis that are happening, but like this year is like a lot of Cassimis.
It's Zimi Town.
And I think it's really exciting and yeah, it's powerful. And I think if we're in the practice of like looking at it, on a regular basis, right, it can really kind of help you focus your attention on like where on a personal level you can, yeah, take opportunities. I would say like I probably always say this every single year, but I think especially for 2026, like if I have one advice, it would be to not hide away from the transits that seem scary.
Mm.
Like I feel like rushing towards it is gonna bring a lot of dividends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that feels really powerful. And thank you for bringing it back to the moon because I would say as I go deeper and deeper into my astrological studies, you kind of learn about these big bad transits and like, oh, Uranus and Gemini are like, oh, Mars and Pluto are going to make this opposition or Mars Saturn. And it's like all these things that kind of get hyped up a lot, not unnecessarily. I mean, these are very important and observably significant transits, especially in hindsight when you can kind of see the trail of destruction that some of them have left,
Yes.
figurative and literal. But as I go along with my astrological practice, I really am more and more working with the moon because, again, it's this incredibly changeable entity, but predictable. And so knowing when it's going to be in its places of dignity each month, these places, the moon is traveling so fast, we get to visit them quite regularly. They have a very stabilizing and grounding effect in my practice that just kind of always reminds me that I'm here on Earth. I get to live here and observe from here. And the moon is kind of like beaming down and filtering through all of the material from beyond just our little Earth and bringing it onto our own awareness. And so, yeah, I just encourage anyone who does feel maybe overwhelmed or intimidated by certain transits to either if I know that the decans are kind of a weird little place that not a lot of people necessarily put attention or as much focus as I do, but even just grounding in with like lunations
Mm.
and really being aware not only of new moons and full moons, but also the quarter moons are quite magical and quite potent. I think if there's going to be a point at which at least some of the astrologers that I talk to, like we're talking about the quarter moons now. I think too, just the quality of the moon and its phases really also brings me back to my whole decanic approach in the first place, because the moon has its new and then two quarters and then full phases, but the quarters are mirroring each other. So it's almost like they're one entity in my mind where it's like we're full, we're new, or we're half and half. And so
Mm.
this number three, the importance of the number three, and just like taking an approach where we break things down into threes, maiden, mother, crone. Like all of these things feel really, really related and integrated now in my practice that it's so helpful to be able to touch in and ground with those phases and just the moon doing its thing no matter what else is happening. So like thank you, moon, for being predictably changing and something that we can like, yeah, really work with that way.
Yeah. Thank you, Mara. This has been just absolutely incredible. As you were speaking, I'm thinking about we really need to start like the musician astrologer club. I feel like there's such a way in which I perceive you to be like so natural at pattern recognition and making sense of patterns and then communicating it in a way that's really landing and very inspiring and really, really grounding. So thank you for your gifts. Thank you for sharing it with us. Um, Final thing, can you talk a little bit more about how people can work with you in the coming year? I know you have some offerings that are astrological in nature.
I do. The best place to find me would be through my website, which is lizziesgriffs.com. So that's a little bit weird because my first name is not anywhere near that website and it doesn't necessarily tie to me, but in an obvious way. But yeah, so my website is Lizzie's Griffs, Lizzies Griffs, GRIFFS.com.
Great. And we'll make sure to also link it in the show notes.
That's a great idea. I have some readings brewing and going where I'm really grateful to work with the perfection cycle. I love annual perfections so much. They make so much sense and I think
Yeah.
are an absolutely brilliant way of dividing up these large swaths of time. And so I have readings that one reading is called Cards of Perfection and brings in the tarot and the cards with their decanic dignities and all of the planets and kind of like helping people navigate through their year with some anchors and allies and tarot cards that they can really turn to and work with over the course of the year. That was kind of like the first offering that came through for me. Then I've also started doing the reading that I shared with you, which is called the Solar Perfection reading, which is, I think, really valuable because you don't need to know your birth time in order to really kind of go deep with your natal sun and learn a
Mm.
lot about your chart and your life direction just by kind of tracking what your natal sun is doing. And so it's also taking a perfection approach. So looking at a year-long cycle of time, but really looking at the sun and the sun's ruler to kind of provide guidance for how to move through a particular year. So those are two readings that I've really been enjoying giving. And I also have, for a lot of my non-astro friends, they've been getting their first chart reading with me, which has been really sweet and beautiful. So I imagine that probably your listeners are not coming here into this space without having had some insight into their chart before. But, if any of my weirdness feels like it might be helpful on your guidance through your first look at your chart, I do like to share my perspective there. It feels like a lot of um kind of feels more like being in the teacher role,
Mm.
and that's okay. I'm
Yeah.
a teacher, so like, oh yeah, this feels fine and like a really helpful gift to share. Some people are absolutely uninterested in having someone tell them about themselves or tell them anything about themselves. But then there are many other people who are just so curious. Like I had somebody the other day, I just pulled up her chart on my phone and she was like, Mara, what does it say? Does this tell me I'm happy? And I fell on the floor laughing that she was asking me if her chart said she was happy or not. But anyway, I really love to talk astrology and hear astrology. And so if anybody wants to just kind of nerd out, you can find me. I will be happy to nerd out with you. And we can go much longer than 2 hours or much shorter too, if you'd like.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like there is a misconception that a lot of people have that getting your chart read is like a one-time thing. But I love getting my chart read the first time by new readers because everybody's always seeing something differently. Especially, I think when you're working with people who are creative and imaginative, which you are, Mara, I think people can hear new things, and experience new things through their birth chart. And I think also insights from your birth chart are not equally activated at the same time. Your birth chart, because of the way that transits work, different parts are going to be activated at different times. Like, for example, in my own life, I have never resonated with my Venus in Aquarius, or that's never been top of mind because there are all these other things that I've always been so busy worrying about, like my Sun Moon square, my exalted Mars and Jupiter, and my domicile Saturn. Like they're always so loud in my chart. And then Venus in Aquarius is just always kind of hanging out there. But this year, with Pluto coming into Aquarius, I've had to get readings from people where I literally asked them like, "Hey, can we focus on my Venus in Aquarius because I don't really know this part of my chart extremely well." And I
Mhm.
think it's an ongoing process of contemplation and also experimenting with what it feels like to get insights about your birth chart, from different astrologers. I would highly recommend those of you who are especially listening all the way to the end here to book a reading with Mara. Um, you clearly like Mara and Mara's approach and personality and energy. So just book a reading already. Okay. Final words, Mara, that you want to say before we wrap up?
Um, Thank you so much for oh, so much. I mean, yeah, thank you for sharing so much of your insights and your approach with me and so many other people. I know that it has just been tremendously helpful. And I'm so honored to be able to have this conversation with you and to have the ear of your listeners who are people who are just fantastically out here doing the thing. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.